I never had any birthday cards or Christmas cards to indicate there was anybody out there. And at 5 years old, in my first children's home, I remember the house matron, everything was very functional. And she called to me one morning, she said, Fatima, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, be down here in the reception area. She said, your biological mum's coming to collect you to move you to a new children's home where your half brother and sister will be. So you'll be living with them. What?
Yeah.
What's that all about? I thought, 5 years old. How do you process that?
What does any of that
What does that mean?
Yeah.
And also emotionally, how can you express how you're feeling and talk that through properly? You know, all these areas for young children, that's actually traumatizing a child much more. So they're supposed to be in care to be looked after. Actually, in fact, they're not. They're doubly making it worse.
Yeah. Welcome to the Silent Epidemic by Omnia Therapy. I'm your host, Hatice Mehmet-Quirk, and as always, we're talking about the things nobody else is in mental health. Today, we have the privilege of speaking with athletics champion, but just as importantly, a champion for vulnerable young people across the UK. Fatima Whitbread, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Hatice. It's really lovely to be here with you.
I'm really touched that you've agreed to come on to the show as well, especially to share with everyone the great work that you're about to do with young people.
Yeah, well, obviously, Fatima's UK campaign is all about trying to bring the collaboration and partnerships together for the 4 nations. So it's harnessing the power of one voice in order to try and share good practice and knowledge to improve the life outcomes for our young children. And we all know that children and young people are the most vulnerable in society in the care system. So it's of vital importance that we start to work together collaboratively in order to make that change and a difference to their lives.
So firstly, how are you today?
I'm good. I'm very well. I'm constantly always working on myself. I think it's really important and to share one's vulnerability as well, because as you know, I was abandoned as a baby and left to die in a flat and a neighbour heard the baby crying and hadn't seen anybody coming or going in a couple of days. And of course she called the police who came and banged down the door and rescued the baby, which was myself. And then I was made a ward of court by Hackney Borough Council. And I spent the next 14 years of my life in children's homes. So I'm really guessing now, my ministry is Fatima's UK campaign to help those young children and people in the care system. And I always say that my mental health is no different to anybody else's. You know, it's something that I need to work on. My primary care years will always give me a kick in the rear. I mean, if I was to look back and I'd say to that 3-year-old girl now, Fatima, you know, would you believe you'd ever be sitting here talking to Hatice about your career and what you're doing with Fatima's UK campaign? I probably wouldn't have believed it. But when I look in the mirror every morning and I see that 3-year-old vulnerable young girl, I say, well, you didn't do too bad and you're doing a good job. You know, so I guess in answer to what you're saying, I'm feeling really positive about what Fatima's UK campaign can do in changing the history of our care system sector, because it's broken, Hatice. We need to do much more. And the government itself, I mean, they can only do so much. They can't plug all the holes. So we've got to look to ourselves, to the moral and ethical responsibility to try and do what we can in the areas that we can. And it's quite multifaceted. You know, when you look at children in the care system, we're talking about social workers, foster carers, we're talking about homelessness, education, mental health, which you know very much about. I mean, these areas need to be addressed. You know, are they serving our young people the way they should be? And, you know, what is failing, what's not working is that there is some fundamentally good stuff out there, but they work in small groups all over the place and in silos. So in actual fact, they're not communicating. They don't know who's out there and what's best works for our young children and young people. So bringing that together collaboratively at a summit next year, April 23rd and 24th, which will be at the Guildhall in London, to bring the four nations together and that shared good practice and knowledge. We hope that we're going to make that difference to these young people and future generations to come.
Because I think, I've read your book, Survivor. I urge anyone that hasn't read it to go ahead and read it. It's written really, really well. And it was like listening to you speak it when I was reading it. It was fantastic. And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think this is where your drive and passion really comes from, because obviously you've been there, you've experienced it, you've lived to tell the tale. But all these years later, and having looked into it, it's still, the system hasn't really changed much in those years, has it?
Absolutely not. There are some things that are a bit better. In the 60s, we had bigger children's homes. My first children's home was more like an institution, so 25 children. And I can always remember playing in the front room, which faced the car park. And anybody that came in and out the car park would always say, is that my mummy coming to collect me? And this is very true of a lot of children that are in the care system. They suffer with trauma and neglect and abandonment issues, which is, trauma is really important for people to have trauma, be trauma informed, to understand what happens in a child's mind, because they trap themselves there. They find it very hard to process. There's also misconceptions about children that are in the care system. Are they there because they're naughty children? No, they're there through no fault of their own. And I was no different. So for me, it's all about being able to share the emotional intelligence and giving back what it is and what it means, which I fully understand, for a child to be in the care system sector, and it for not to be working properly, their emotional needs not to be met. We're talking about early intervention of our younger years, being able to help families before that actually happens.
Yeah, of course.
So if that's possible, because the time and the efforts that are put into younger children in their earlier lives will define who and what they become in order to decide, what society ends up. So it's all about building happier lives, healthier lives, better communities, and a nicer, kinder society. And the only way you're going to do that is if you start working collaboratively together in partnerships to improve those outcomes, to build proper foundations, to give these young children more aspirational experiences. Not one-off experience, Hatice, because a lot of young people will not get out their beds for that one-off opportunity. But if you give them the life chances of making independent, building a future, they can see beyond that dark place they're living, that actually that they can, say, live an independent life rather than say you should be living independently at 18, which is ludicrous, really. When you look at that, most conventional families' children don't leave home until about 25 to 30.
Of course.
So
I've said this to you before. We've got teenagers, and one of which is 18, and he's no way ready to leave the family home because, he's deemed an adult, but he's still got a lot of growing up to do to even get to grips with being an adult.
Exactly.
So to then say to that child at 18, you're now an adult, off you pop, go and live life. No. It doesn't necessarily work that way, does it?
Well, look, I always say, what do you want? A fence at the top of the cliff or an ambulance at the bottom? We've got to do more for these young people. It's hugely challenging to become, move into adulthood. 18, what the government effectively do is they give them £3,000. They give them 1 point of contact twice a year. And then they say, off you go, get on with that. Now, how is that humanly possible for an 18-year-old to survive? And that's why 33% of them, within the first 2 years end up homeless. And now we know, this year alone, 2,000 to 3,000 between 18 and 20-year-olds will be on the streets homeless. And in the last 5 years, it's a 45% increase of children becoming homeless. And that's only the tip of the iceberg. When you look at it, we still don't know about those that are sofa surfing and those that, are rough sleepers. And that's not possible if these children do not have a proper roof over their head. They're not able, to study with their education. They're not going to have jobs, to hold down any jobs. Obviously, you can't live off the street and do all those things. And let's face it, a third of our children in the care system, compared to most conventional families, only go on to further education. Because most of them, these young people, by the time they're 14, 27% of them have mental health issues.
Yeah.
So it's a real problem. We need to start working collaboratively to build like apprenticeships, bring in private companies so we can put them on a path of employment, skill them up.
Yeah. So they're not just dumped out on, you know, with this £3,000, which for them might seem like it's a lot of money, but in the real world, it's not a lot of money. It's definitely not going to help set you up with any kind of future, is it?
No.
So what I'm hearing is that your campaign is intent on, and you said something earlier about the consistency.
Yeah.
And I think that, and the continuity. So it's not just a one-off fun day that the children can attend that will probably stay in their minds, but it's not really going to make an impact. So
building proper foundation.
That's exactly it.
That foundation will hopefully help them into future, you know, having their own family and actually breaking that cycle. In order, I mean, that's all we all want, isn't it? Having independence, to be able to live independently, to be able to fund ourselves, to be able to have a family and know that we can bring them up in the way that we can, you know, that it's needed.
Yeah.
You know, most conventional families, mums and dads, I mean, these kids don't have mums and dads, nans and granddads, aunts and uncles. They don't have the bank of mum and dad to help them. Yeah. A lot of young children, conventional families, of course, they get the support that they have. They're circumnavigated through their schooling, through their friendships. They're supported into their careers. And then obviously way beyond, once they're in their careers, you know, to the end of life term.
Yeah.
You know, it's... These young people need realistic support, you know, where we can actually give them and put them on an unstoppable human path to reaching their goals.
Yeah. You've mentioned a couple of things that, if you don't mind, I'm going to take you back a little bit. You said that when you were younger, you know, someone pulling up in the...
ago.
Yeah. Someone pulling up in the car park and you're saying, is that my mum? She's come to collect me. Now, if you don't mind me asking, was that ever explained to you?
No.
Do you think that's where that there's some work to be done there, isn't there, to manage the expectations of these young children, so they're not yearning and they're pining for these. Yeah,
they're traumatized in the first place. So, let alone being look, I always say they arrive in the care system having been abused, and some of them, I mean, I was physically, mentally and sexually abused, and traumatized and abandonment is a big issue for attachment issues, and being able to build relationships is so important. And often we see these kids, they get bunted from place to place, which is no good because it affects their education. Their curriculum is different all over the place, and their continuity. They find it hard to build relationships, so it's no wonder they struggle. You know, for me, I mean, obviously, and I was no different. I never had any birthday cards or Christmas cards to indicate there was anybody out there. And at 5 years old, in my first children's home, I remember the house matron. Everything was very functional, and she called to me one morning. She said, "Fatima, tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock, be down here in the reception area." She said, "Your biological mum's coming to collect you to move you to a new children's home where your half-brother and sister will be. So you'll be living with them." What?
Yeah.
What's that all about? I thought. 5 years old. How do you process that?
What does any of that
what
even
does that mean?
Yeah.
And also emotionally, how can you express how you're feeling and talk that through properly? You know, all these areas for young children, that's actually traumatizing a child much more. So they're supposed to be in care to be looked after. Actually, in fact, they're not. They're doubly making it worse.
It almost sounds like for them, they're so inundated with running the day-to-days of the care home that they haven't even got the time to consider the impact of what they're doing. They're just ticking the boxes in terms of, right, Fatima's got to go tomorrow. She's meeting her mum. She's got half-brother and sister coming. I've got to let her know. Boom, that's job done. Without really realising the impact
of
that.
That's going to impact you. I remember sitting waiting in the foyer, and I could see the opaque glass window, and then I saw this pink Cerisi movement, and when the matron opened the door, a large burly lady came in with this black curly hair, and she was talking to the matron. I could see she had a gold tooth, and this whiff of perfume came in, real strong whiff of perfume, and she never made eye contact with me at all. And then just standing behind us, there was this slim, linear lady, blonde, sort of mousy colour hair, little duffel coat, and she burst in with lots of smiles and talking to me and smiling. I thought, oh, that must be my mummy. Because young children gravitate to the warmth and the love and the security of somebody, you know, and that's exactly what most children who have been abandoned want. They want that.
Yeah. So in that moment for you, so you've been told you're going to be moved away, you're going to meet your mum for the first time, which that you can probably recollect because before then you probably had no memory. You've also got this half brother and sister that you're going to meet, and then she comes in and there's not even a connection there. No. So once again, that rejection for you was raw all over again.
Unfortunately, this is what happens sometimes with young children in the care system. Nothing's really they're not sat down and had anything explained to them. For me, it was like an hour and a half long journey, and I was thinking, why am I leaving the only place I know, which is my home, and all the children which became my family? It was really strange and very unsettling. But the whole of the journey down to the next children's home, not a word was spoken to me by the biological mum. She never looked my way. And I remember looking out the window, crying all the way, thinking, why am I leaving the only place I know? And when I actually got to the second children's home, the house auntie came out to greet us. She said, now run along, Fatima, into the back garden. You'll see all the other children there. She said, and you'll meet your half-brother and sister. So she said, while I deal with your mum. So I sort of thought, well, okay. So picture this, 5 years old, and a little girl's tugging on my dress. She must only be 4. And she's looking up at me saying, oh, you must be my sister. And I said, oh, yeah, I must be your sister. So she said, come on, let's go on the climbing frame, because they were all playing on the climbing frame. And I went to take a few steps up the climbing frame, and then I felt this thud coming across my chest, and someone pulled me in. You look after your sister, I cut your throat. And they were the first words that my biological mum spoke to me.
Ever said to you?
Very frightening. Very frightening for a little young child.
But also, like, you're in a care home, so you're meant to be being cared for.
Yeah.
And that's the first contact that you've had with your biological mum.
That's right.
Which is a threatening and abusive comment.
What's worse,
Where was the protection?
Well, what was worse, though, Hatice, was that suddenly the 2 children, the half-brother and sister, ran to the mother and started talking in the mother tongue, Turkish Cypriot. And then I realised I didn't know them. And that frightened me, that I was suddenly in this setup where I didn't know anything about them. And I knew then, you know, that I didn't belong. And of course, the social workers deemed it right that they were going to send us back to live with the mother, and I said I didn't want to go because I was frightened. The week after she came to collect us, we got halfway down to the road to get the Green Line bus, which it was then, to Aldgate, and she stopped me and poked me in the ribs, and she went to her handbag and she put what was a half a crown in my hand. She said, off. She said, we don't love you, we don't want you. And the 2 little kids say, oh, we don't love you, we don't, which is normal for kids. But for me, a 5-year-old, that was quite tragic, because part of me started to talk myself into thinking maybe I'm going to have a fit and be a family. And then, of course, when I got back to the children's home, the house auntie, one of them said, why are you here? So I said, my mum doesn't want me. So she took the coin and she said, well, go on then, you didn't want to go anyway, out in the garden. In those days, Hatice, in the 60s, children were to be seen and not heard, and their emotional needs were rarely met. And today's slightly different, although, but as far as government's concerned, I mean, I've seen governments come and go and kick that same tin can down the road since the years I was in care, 60 years ago. So policy has not really changed, and we need to do a lot more to protect these children. So is that where you think the policy is at the moment? Is still of that stance of children are to be seen and not heard? Yeah, well, they've been invisible for many years. I mean, let's face it. I mean, if you get the odd instance like Baby P, then it's all over the place. And then after that, it's brushed under the carpet. And people, the general public, don't understand that actually these children are living a life where it is, not their emotional needs being met. And we need to do a lot more. There's about 110,000 kids in the care system and a shortage of about 10,000 foster carers. And we really need to start working harder to improve and bridging that gap, because every child deserves the right to a happy and safe childhood, and that love and hope is so important, and of course, not only for the children, but for the paid and unpaid workforce on the ground floor level, because they need to see change. They work exceptionally hard, and I think they're always at the brunt of it. And often the case, where they work in silos, they're not being heard. And also the ministers, local governments, they need to start listening to what the children's needs are. So at the summit, the children are at the crux of that. So hopefully they'll make the right decisions.
And it sounds like it needs to be a situation where the emotional needs, or the requirements to meet the emotional needs of these children, needs to be within that foundation. So these people that even paid or volunteers need to have that education of how to support the children emotionally. And albeit it may be that they might need more hands on deck, so that they're not just ploughing through and ticking boxes, so that they are able to do that very important thing and meet these children's emotional needs, rather than shouting up the stairs to them and telling them tomorrow X, Y, and Z's going to happen, landing them with yet another blow, which
another major trauma,
of course,
which they've got to deal with and work
with
through.
no one around to help support them, because as you said, you didn't even know how to express your emotions. So how could you? So it seems to me, from a mental health perspective, that education needs to be set at that foundation as well.
Well, it does. I mean, I've been to many children's homes, and I mean, in some cases, I've heard young children have come up and they said, "Oh, I'm really happy to be here because I can sleep in my own bed." And then there was two little girls also said, we've got our own shoes, because when we lived at home, Mummy, we could only afford one pair of shoes, so we took it in turns to go to school. So there are some good things about care, but not as far as the everyday workings. We still need to work hard on building a safe construct around our children, working collaboratively with social workers, carers, foster carers, educational teachers, and trying to communicate about this child, keeping that safe construct. Because what happens at the home something else might be different at school, vice versa. And if they're communicating, they can best serve that child and secure needs, than just ignore them, and eventually they just fall off the radar. And the child itself obviously knows that. I mean, the jobs for foster carers, sometimes you get good foster carers, but not always. And I think that's a crazy thing, because when you hear a child say, well, we're just a statistic, we know that you're doing this for a job. And when it comes to holidays, you'll go on holiday and send me back in care, whilst you go on holiday with your children. Well, so what message is that giving to that child?
Because even, you mentioned attachment earlier, and it is important for a child to be able to have that secure attachment with a consistent somebody throughout their lives. And then if they get to the point where they're forming that bond with the foster carer, and then the foster carer goes off on holiday for 2 weeks with their own children, dumping that child back into the system, well, what does that do to the attachment? It just severs it all over again, and leaves that child with them feelings of rejection, feeling vulnerable, feeling uncared for. All of those things come to the forefront again. And I get it. Yes, everyone needs a break, but what about the impact to the child?
That brings us on to the book that's launched coming out. It's called My Bright Shining Star. That book is gifted to children in the care system. So any money that comes in goes to the programs that we run through the Fatima's UK campaign, which is the power of sport, the power of arts and technology. And what that does is it teaches life skills. It gets young people engaged in their local community with, not all want to do sports, some like dancing and singing. So that's why the different clubs. But the idea really is for them to engage with people in their community, build up a social network, feel self-esteem, life skills, which can be adaptable to any time of their life in work, and possibly some of them which we work with the England Football League Trust, which is all the boroughs up and down the country, West Ham Safeguarding, which is all the London boroughs. Also, I just put a programme together with Graham Gooch, who was Britain's finest batsman years ago in cricket. Essex Cricket County they cover the East London to East Anglia, and these young people are unable to go to these programs, work with coaching. Some of them have catering, some might like medics, groundsmen, management groups, security. It's so many options for our young people. Really what's at the heart of this is bringing positive change and implementing change at government level, because bringing the stakeholders together, and we've got 760 people coming each day on the 23rd and 4th of April next year at the Guildhall. And it's by having a policy to them to sign up to improve the life outcomes for early intervention and also care leavers, just to improve that, so that they can implement that change at government level by working collaboratively together, and not small pockets here and there, because you'll have the government here and you've got all the local government authorities just trying to penetrate through those walls as small groups. Never going to work. But as it, harnessing the power of that one voice and everybody's signing up to that policy will make the difference. And that's what we're trying to do, make the difference to young people's lives by bringing that positive change to improve their outcomes.
Because it sounds like what you're saying is there are good services out there, but the problem that you've got is the way that the infrastructure is, the left hand doesn't know what the right hand's doing. So with the silos. So because of that, the good work can almost get missed in certain areas and certain
no
sections.
Continuity.
Yeah, and then that's not really helping. So you want to bypass all of that and say, right, let's go to the top. One set of rules across the nation for everyone to follow. So that good work can touch everyone within the care system.
Yeah, it's also not just the one set of rules. In terms of changing policy, of course, the age from 18 to 25 is really important. Yeah. Because as we know, they've not got a chance at 18 to live an independent life. It's a proven fact that 90% the people that live on the streets today, 90% come from the care system.
Yeah, okay? Which is madness.
Right, it's madness. And let's look at the prisons. 27 to 30% of under 21-year-olds that in prisons today have either come from or crossed the path of the care system. And why is that? Because they're targeted, exploited, and they don't have anything out there to help circumnavigate them and put them on the right path.
Well, they don't know where to turn. They don't know who they can rely on or what. They've got no support network. So they're almost just trying to find their way through life, which is impossible if they haven't got that support in place.
And that's what this is about. There are some good programs out there. And through the gate programs in the prisons, which I've been visiting quite a lot of prisons lately, working with James Timpson and a few others to talk about these programs. Because whilst they're in prison, you've got them this captivated audience. Yeah. So you skill them up there so that then when they come out of prisons through the gates, they've got something to go to and they've got the skills to be able to stick with that job. It's not about let them come out and then they think, well, there's nothing out here for me. I'd rather be back in there with my mates. I've got a cell, warm cell and food. I've got all my friends there.
And especially because self-esteem, if it's low because these children haven't been nurtured and they haven't been cared for in the appropriate way, they don't have the attachment, their self-esteem is going to be so low that their self-belief that they can even achieve or even attain to any prospect is going to be limited, isn't it?
So it is important to give young people hope, and that will in turn give them the opportunities of having these opportunities of building programs for a proper foundation for work, for education,
yeah.
you know, and also connecting with people, which then they will have a proper role model. Role models are really important in these young people's lives because, again, self-esteem is all about that. It's been feeling confident about who you're with and what you're capable of achieving. And a good role model will help that young person, like your mum and dad would, like your brother or sister, an aunt and uncle, a nan and granddad. The book, My Bright Shining Star, is all about my Auntie Ray, who was in the care system. She was a good role model for us kids. She just got us, she understood us. So we felt happy and secure in the knowledge of knowing our needs were being met. Because when Auntie Ray was there, she built us with love and happiness, and we felt confident, you know, to try stuff. Whereas a lot of young people are feeling shamed, where they feel they you know, they've been in the care system, and it's the stigmatisation of that, you know, is holding them back. You know, and really, when all's said and done, that's why a story that I use with my lived experience can help empower others to come forward, because there are enough of them out there that have made successful from coming from the backgrounds, you know, in the care system.
But also giving people the awareness and the understanding, like the stats that you shared earlier, 90% of people, you know, that are homeless have been through the care system, etc.
Frightening, isn't it?
Like, and again, this is typical attitudes that come through with people when they see homeless people. Oh, they're down and out, or they've turned to drink or drugs, or they've done it to themselves, etc. Actually, that's complete nonsense. These are people that have just not had a chance. They've not been given that step that was necessary to integrate them into the real world, which is difficult enough when you've got a support network around you. Talk less of when you're just given £3,000, say, off you pop, go and deal with the world.
Well, Hattie, look, it's not even just that. I mean, we're all only 1 or 2 steps away from that. Now, picture this. If your husband's the breadwinner and he dies tomorrow and you haven't got any income, then you've got to start looking, where are you going to live? How are you going to live? And making choices like having the gas or electric on, or having food on the table. There are a lot of professional people also that live on the street that have found themselves on the street through hardship, through that scenario where they've, you know, we're only any of us 2 steps away from that. So, you know, it's never just a unique to people that live in the care system. It's unfortunately the way of the world, you know, that can happen to anybody. But how we deal with that is our responsibility, you know, each and every one of us, you know. And I always say the same with children in the care system. You know, the public also have, you know, a public at large have a moral and ethical responsibility to ask themselves, what more can I do? Where could I help? You know, because, you know, it's important, you know, the communities work together. And we often see big charities and organisations swooping up everything, and all the smaller charities and organisations with the people that I call frontliners. They're the ones that struggle on a day-to-day basis, that are there on the front line to make things work for those people in their communities. And one day that's going to dry up and all end, and then we're going to be in a bigger mess than we find ourselves at the moment.
Because also, how long before those frontliners sort of get fed up of banging down the doors?
Well, they are. We're at that stage now.
Exactly, because it's almost like, well, they're trying and they're not really getting anywhere. And even like with your Auntie Ray, you were really lucky in a way, because again, this came through in your book, because she. And maybe I've interpreted this wrong, and correct me if I did, but she sort of struck me as the kind of person that knew the settings of the care home weren't ideal, would openly roll her eyes to you guys about it in terms of
validate us.
Exactly. And that's
so important.
That's exactly it. And that feeling of validation, of being told, actually, children, this isn't right. This isn't how this should be. That helped build that connection, because you finally saw that she had your back.
She had our back. I remember asking Auntie Ray, I picked all the daffodils all around the home, and I knew where she lived, because I used to run up the staircase and look out the port window, and I could see where she clip-clopped up and down the road, and she lived on the end there. So I took the daffodils down to Auntie Ray and I hid them behind my back. And when I knocked on the door and she opened the door, I said, "Will you be my mummy?" And so she said, "Fats," she said, "come round the back, let's talk about this." Of course, I thought I was going to be in trouble picking the daffs. But what she did, she sat me in the kitchen and she taught me two really important things as a child. And I was only probably around about 10. And I sat there and she said, "Fat," she said, "I can't just be your mum," she said, "because I got to be mum to all those other children too." She said, "But here's the thing." She said, "I'm not always there and you are." She said, "So why don't you be there, mummy, when I'm not there?" And what that did for me, it made me step up and call out any injustices, which were many in the home there, when Auntie Ray wasn't on duty. And of course, in doing that, I was trying to meet the children's emotional needs, playing with them when they're rocking themselves at night, crying, wetting the beds or having nightmares.
Or even keeping them awake.
Keeping them awake so they didn't wet the bed. So when the house aunties come up, they're supposed to be standing on the end of the bed until the house parents came up. So I'd say sleep, and then I'd get them up and take them to the toilet and then stand them up when I heard the movement downstairs, you know. But in doing that, what that did for me was, in giving, you receive. So in giving them the love they needed emotionally, they gave it back. So the other thing that it did, it swiveled the lens. So in fact, it helped me not to be victimised by my circumstances that I was in. Because I was so entrenched in being a mum and looking after their needs, I didn't stop thinking about myself, which is often the case with young people. They get trapped up in their own head, they imprison themselves. They find it really hard to process and they become kind of victims to it. And some of them find it hard to break that mould, be tough and inner strength, have that resilience. And I don't know, I always had a real inner strength. I had that resilience, and not all children do have it. So for me, that was a really big, important lessons that I learned. And Auntie Ray, you know, a good role model like that, it can help children, you know, to
and it
understand
goes to show you, right? Because bless you, you've gone out, you've picked some daffs for Auntie Ray. You knew where she is because you sort of followed her out the window and you've gone and knocked on her door. And you've asked her this big question and she's taken you round the back, made a cup of tea, sat you down. How long did it take, that conversation?
I was with Auntie Ray for about half an hour.
So half an hour, one conversation, and look at the impact that it had. It
Amazing.
As you said, it changed your perspective. It built connections with the other children in the home because you realise, actually, they're in the same boat as me as well, and I can help them as well as help myself. So through that half an hour conversation, which speaks volumes, doesn't it, in terms of it doesn't take much to make an impact, does it?
No.
Half an hour. She could have had that conversation in a room full of all of the children in the home and had an impact with all of them, which hopefully with your summit you can start to introduce.
Auntie Ray will always be, you know, remembered, you know, and that's why the book is named My Bright Shining Star, because she was. And it's a book that will hopefully help young people to understand what these children go through, you know, and also for parents that are maybe thinking about opening their hearts and their homes to fostering, because as I said, we've got a shortage of 10,000 foster carers, and by 2026 we'll probably be 30,000 short.
Wow.
It's hugely, you know, I mean, there's like I say, 110,000 young children in the care system, and there's a 33% increase, weekly increase for local authorities seeing children come into the care system. So we really need to work and act fast about addressing some of these issues, you know, before it really becomes such a systemic problem.
An even bigger problem than it already is.
And part of what I'm trying to do, and like what you're trying to do, and I'm sure we will together, will leave a legacy for future generations beyond ours, because we need to do that. Otherwise, the whole thing really, I mean, it's sad to see these young children suffering, you know, and being, again, supposedly looked after by the corporate parent, but not. They're being let down yet again.
Let down when they've already been massively let down.
That's right. But there's hope on the horizon,
Yeah.
and I'm sure between you and myself, through the Fatima's UK campaign, we'll definitely make that change and that difference to these young people's lives.
How did sports, particularly javelin, help you cope with and overcome those early challenges?
Well, for me, sport was my saviour, living in children's homes, because when I went to school, I would always find it a struggle to concentrate, which is what a lot of young people in care do. They struggle because they're emotionally traumatised. So the one thing that gave me a sense of freedom and to forget about all my worries was sport.
Wow.
And I usually found myself, kicking the football around with the boys or climbing the trees. I was a bit of a tomboy. But sport was where I also learned a lot more about self-confidence, earning respect from my peers, instead of being told off all the time at school by the teachers. They were sort of had more admiration for me and respect, because I became, quite an entity really where the school sports were concerned. I was doing well.
Yeah.
So it was through sport that I met the love of the Whitbreads.
Right.
Yeah, and it was quite a funny story, really. The netball match that we had was a league match, and I remember telling Auntie Ray, if we win this, we're going to get a medal, and I'd love to give you the medal, Auntie Ray. I said, because Auntie Ray was like the mum I always wanted. So Auntie Ray said to me, now listen, young lady, she said, you haven't won that medal yet. She said, so just you concentrate on what you're doing and stop worrying about the medal and enjoy it. And I always remember those words when I was an Olympic athlete.
Right.
Yeah, because there's always two games in the arena. There's the event itself, competing, and the other psychological game where people thinking, if they've just done a good performance, what medal am I going to get? Am I going to get a medal? Once you start getting into the realms of that, then forget it.
Because it's game over.
So she taught me a good lesson in just saying that. But the match was going 11-11, 12-11, 12-all, and I was sort of making a lot of noise because I was team captain. And the umpire blew the whistle and said, young lady, keep that noise down, otherwise you'll be off. So I thought, what's that? Like kids in the care system are quite feisty. They're used to standing up on their own feet and fighting for your own rights all the time. And so the match was going like 12-all, 13-12, 13-all. So don't get me wrong. I mean, today they'd call us motivators, right?
Yeah.
But back then they used to call you a pain in the ass. And so the whistle went again, and the umpire said, I've told you once, if I've got to tell you again, you'll be off.
Right.
And as I turned my back, I started muttering, and their team captain said, Fats, don't. She's really strict, you'll be off. Well, anyway, we won. Auntie Ray got her medal. And then, of course, not long after that, I said to my friend Alma, who lived in one of the children's home around the corner, Alma, I said, let's go to the local athletic club. It's summer season's here, the track and field, So as we walked like 5 miles, probably had the bus money, we bought Woodbine cigarettes or something silly like that, as you do back then in the day. When we got to the gates, Alma saw the sprinters and off she went. Yeah. And I saw this tall, blonde, good-looking fella throwing what looked like a spear, and I thought, he looks nice, I'll go over there. And as I went over there, I saw a javelin on the ground, and I went to pick it up, and he said, you can't do that. And so he turned to the shot put coach, Jack Grinney, and Jack said, no, young lady, you'll have to wait in the stand for the javelin coach to come. So I'm sort of sitting there tapping my toes saying, well, where's this javelin coach then? And he said, oh, here comes the javelin coach now. And this Mini pulled up in the car park. Yeah. And as this person started walking across, I was, it's that same woman on the netball court. What are the chances? Yeah. So I thought, that's never going to let me throw the javelin. But Jack said, Mrs. Whitbread, I've got someone I want to introduce you to. And before he could sort of mention my name, she said, oh, you're Fatima. She said, well, let me tell you, young lady, any of that cheek you showed on the netball court, there'll be no throwing any javelins here. Yeah. So I sort of cut my hands together. I said, I promise you I'll behave. So she had me straight away. And of course, as the weeks went by and I was showing a bit of talent, she said, you've got a bit of talent. She said, why don't you ask your mum and dad to come up and we can talk about getting you some boots and a javelin and put you into a competition program. So I kind of just nodded my head. And this is never spoken about, you see. that's what it was like in those days. Nobody ever spoke about kids in the care system.
Yeah.
And I felt ashamed.
Yeah.
So I kept really quiet. And so then she said, Jack, she said, has Fatima got a hearing problem? So Jack said, no, why's that? Well, every time I ask her about mum and dad, oh, she said, don't you know, she's one of the kids from the children's homes. And then with that, Mrs. Whitbread bought up a pair of boots the following week with a javelin. She said, I've had a young girl who's retired.
No.
She said, these boots are probably 2 sizes too big. Stuff them with paper, she said. And then, you know, they're yours. And I was so excited because, like all kids and back in the day, everything was communal.
Yeah.
You could never get attached to anything. You rarely got anything given to you anyway.
Yeah.
And
something you can call your own anyway. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I was super proud about this.
Yeah.
And I said to my friend Alma, lad, we're going home on the bus, I said today. It was a summer season and we had German students that used to come and look after us. And I wanted to get back and show Ingrid how I'd throw this javelin. Now, picture this, it never happened today. I was standing at the bus stop with my javelin and the bus pulled up and the doors went and the bus man went, and I went, sort of pointed the javelin out. Go on, get on the back and behave, he said. And I got back to the children's home and I said, Ingrid, come in the garden. I'll show you how I throw this javelin when I'm up at the track. And of course, I sort of stepped forward and it took 2 throws to get it up at the end of the garden.
Yeah.
And then I pulled it out the vegetable patch and threw off the potato at the end. And then as I stepped forward, I said, now move out the way. I'm going to give it a really big throw this time. Yeah. I did, and it went smash through the French windows.
Yeah.
And with that, Ingrid standing there with her head in her hands. Oh, you'll be in trouble. I said, never mind, what's new? I said, I'm always getting in trouble.
You were used to it.
Yeah, I was used to it. So I said, I'll tell you what, stick it with sellotape. And of course, Ingrid said, they'll still know. Well, of course they did. And I got a month's ban, which meant no going out after school, you know, so no after school sports, which I really loved. And also I used to stop in and see Auntie Ray on the way home when she was off duty, have a cup of tea and a chat. She always used to keep me on the right track.
Yeah.
And I was getting really fed up because after a couple of weeks of tinkering about with the punches and fixing the bikes and so on, there's only so much of that you can do. And then I got a message from one of the girls in the opposite school. Mrs. Whitbread thinks you've bunked off with the javelin and the boots. You've sold them. You're not interested anymore. So I thought, I can't have that. Yeah. So I got up 2 o'clock one morning when everyone was asleep and I went down to the front room. In the French bureau, I pulled out my envelope and I put, Dear Mrs. Whitbread, sorry I can't come to the track at the moment. I smashed the windows and, you know, but one day I want to be the best javelin thrower in the world. And I kind of stuck it down. I put Mrs. Whitbread St. Chad's School. And as we went out the door, I hid it under my arm the next morning, posted it through the box before I got into school. And of course I waited. And then eventually the phone rang and I put my ear to the glass window and I heard the house auntie saying, no, she can't come. She'd been really naughty. Uncle won't let her come. And so Mrs. Whitbread must have been quite persistent because within a week I was back at the track throwing. And then from that time on, she said, would I like to come and have tea with the family? Yeah. And I said, that would be nice. And I met Mr. Whitbread and I met their 2 sons, Greg, who was 4, and Kirk, who was 2. And then she said, would you like to have a fortnight with us during the summer? And I thought, I'm not sure because, you know, being mum to the kids. So Auntie Ray said to me, look, most of the kids that could go home went home in the summer. She said, you go and have 2 weeks, she said, and find out what it's like living in the family. Yeah. You've always wanted to do that. So I went and I had a good time. I mean, under no illusions, like families' ups and downs, like all kids in the families. And when it came to going back on the last day, Greg, the 4-year-old, said to his mum, do we have to take Fatima back to the shop? Which was quite funny.
But again, the innocence of a child.
Yeah. I know, yeah. And of course, Mrs. Whitbread, by the time she got me back to the children's home, she said, we've been wondering, would you like to come and live with us and be a Whitbread? Wow. And that's how that happened, really. And of course, when I went indoors, the house auntie said, so you're leaving us, are you? And I looked at her and I thought, how do I deal with this? She said, well, Auntie Ray's coming in soon. She said, what are you going to tell her? So I thought it was very unkind, you know, because Auntie Ray was, you know, the mum I always wanted. And of course, no sooner I could hear Auntie Ray coming in the back door, the house auntie's saying, "Oh, so go on then. She's leaving us. Go on, tell Auntie Ray." So Auntie Ray, being true to Auntie Ray, she looked at me and she said, "Fatima," she said, "are you going to become a Whitbread?" She said, "Well," she said, "I couldn't be happier for you." She said, "because they can give you a life that I can't." And that gave me permission to let go. And my mum, Margaret, who's still alive now, she's 84. My mum, you know, I mean, at the time, she said, "Well, you don't have to leave Auntie Ray," because I was really upset. She said, "Auntie Ray can still stay in your life." And of course we did, we stayed in touch.
Nice.
Yeah. So I was one of the lucky ones. And really, through my sport, because I loved my athletics, Mum said to me, "You don't have to carry on with your athletics if you don't want to." And I said, "I do. You know, that's me. I want to be, you know, I love my sport." And of course we did. I mean, I've been to 4 Olympics, broke the world record and won championships, won the BBC Awards, highly decorated, I suppose. But the most important thing in all of that was the journey of self-growth. Because for me, you know, I mean, that enabled me to evolve to the person I am today, and which brings me to my ministry, which is Fatima's UK campaign in serving other children to help them reach their goals too.
It's funny because when you were talking earlier, it was that pull. So obviously you've mentioned the sort of good-looking blonde man that sort of attracted you to that area. But it was the pull to the javelin, and then find out that the javelin coach was the, you know, the netball person that, you know, sort of kept you in, told you off. So you were a little bit nervous around her anyway. And then how it all just fell into place for you.
Fate.
Yeah, definitely. It sounds like the stars were definitely aligned in that way.
Yeah, definitely.
But also the sport being able to give you that healing process to find yourself, be your authentic self, rebuild yourself as an individual, to remind yourself that actually, do you know what? You do matter, and you are important, and you are of value, and that you deserve the love that the Whitbreads were, you know, able to give you.
Absolutely. And this is what every child deserves, the love and security of a good childhood. You know, having that special somebody in their lives. For me, it was like building a new chapter in my life, and moving forward. For looking back, it's important to recognise that every child deserves the right to a safe and happy childhood, and have that special somebody.
Fatima, it's been such a privilege to have you on the show today. Your passion for improving the lives of young people in care and your ongoing advocacy is truly inspiring. If our listeners would like to learn more about the summit and how they can get involved, they need to look at Fatima's website, which is linked into the bio. To all our listeners, we deeply appreciate your time. Please share your thoughts on this episode in the comments, and don't forget to like, subscribe and share if you found this episode helpful. Together, let's keep breaking the silence around mental health and support for those who need it most. This is the Silent Epidemic. See you next time.